So as the first generation of craft brewers faces retirement, I talked to Carol about her own decision-making process.
It was difficult in the beginning just getting taps because people weren't aware of craft beer, local craft beer. I was more expensive than Yuengling and other breweries like that. And now it's just the challenge is the loyalty just isn't there. They love your beer, but you're in a rotation.
Right,
so maybe once a month you'll see your beer on for a $6.
Right.
Well, you can't live on that.
Right, right. So so there's this business challenge, but there was also the issue of you getting close to retirement age.
Right.
I have the feel that this is something that, it's, if not a trend, at least it seems to be something that's happening in the world of beer, where people of the first generation of craft brewing, yourself, we saw it happen at Boulder Brewing out in Colorado and Sprecher Brewing in the Midwest, where they were family-owned breweries where the owners basically said, okay, it's time for me to move on. What's the next phase here?
Right.
Do you agree with that this is sort of a trend that's going on now? Or?
I kind of think it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, unfortunate. And independent, I believe in being independent. I never would, I mean, people think I'm crazy because money's money, but it's also your integrity. And if you sell, is the passion for what you started going to carry on? I don't think it will, personally. And how much money do you need?
Right, exactly.
Right.
Well, how does that play into the sort of the succession in a family-owned business? I mean, it appears that I'm sure that this was something that was raised in your family. Is there's going to be another generation to take over the brewery? How did that go, and what advice do you give other family-owned breweries out there facing the same challenge?
Well, you should get a planner in to kind of help with succession. And just because it's my passion or my husband's passion doesn't mean our children, it's going to be their passion. And we never wanted to force them into the business. So we educated them, and then they found their way, and most of them flew out of state before they would get roped into the business. It's hard work. Mm-hmm. It really is. It's fun at the end of the day, but it's many hours of hard work go into it.
So how did that make you feel that you weren't going to be able to pass it down to your family?
At one point I thought I could pass it on to my son. He was working for the company and he was doing a lovely job, and it really wasn't his thing. He works now in Philadelphia for the Port of Hyundai. He's a logistics major. He likes to play with cranes and ships and big equipment. But it kind of saddened me. But he also thought it was a very difficult business. And even when he was with me, he said, "Mom, why didn't you just sell now?" But I'm pretty stubborn, and I love designing recipes. I love the people involved with beer, and I wasn't ready to give it up. And I know a lot of my grandchildren says, "Nana, can I come and brew beer for you one day?" But who knows? They're too young.
Right.
Who knows what's going to happen?
So did you put feelers out in the beer community to see if someone else wanted to take over the brand or even buy the whole facility?
About 6 months last year, the last 6 months, I talked to about 5 people privately that were in the business for whether we could join or advice. And unfortunately, a lot of them also are struggling. A lot of debt.
Right.
And just a little scary. So nothing happened. So then I had to do something.
That's interesting because the same challenges as you mentioned earlier, that you're one of many possible tap handle options out there. That's also facing, every other brewery is facing the same challenge.
Exactly.
So there is a value to the Stout's name, I think, and yet how successful is somebody going to be to take over the name and try to run back into that same competition?
I mean, I think the breweries that are opening up pubs in Philadelphia are smart. They're going to sell a lot of beer.
Right.
But then I personally, well, I didn't want any more investment in debt because of my age and my husband's age. But I talked to some of my friends, like the Mullins at McGillen's, and the brew pubs are taking business away from them. And, you know, so I personally would never open up a brew pub in Philadelphia, even if I was younger and had the desire and the investors to do it, because I wouldn't want to affect my good accounts that had been loyal to me for years.
That's a great point, and it's a huge issue, I think, in the Philadelphia area.
Yes.
No, you can, it's YouTube, come on. And I know the Mullins are very much part of that whole issue. That's really a nice thing that you, or, you know, a very principled decision that you
I told
made.
Chris, never, as long as my name is on the brewery, will I open up a brew pub or a tasting room in the Philadelphia market. You've been too loyal to me all these years. When I struggled, this was 1988, 89, he had the Gold on Tap, and I was looking at the numbers, and I thought he really wasn't doing well. I said, how can I sell more beer with you? And he said, well, let me think about it. So we met the next week, and he said, listen, I'll give you 2 taps. If we do McGillen's Ale and McGillen's Lager.
Uh-huh.
And then since then, I've done, for the 150th anniversary, I did the 1860.
Right.
So that's in bottles and also draft. And then occasionally he'll throw on a seasonal. So he's just very supportive, and in turn, I'm very supportive to him and his son.
Well, those kind of relationships are really the hallmark of the early craft beer industry, I think, where you had the brewers and the owners themselves going into town and selling their beer personally and building those kind of relationships with the bars. Do you see that still happening today?
Not as much. Not as much.
Not as much. And so you said that you wouldn't operate a pub or a tap room or whatever inside the city to compete, but there was other options as well that seemed that maybe have been ruled out, including a canning line here at Stouts.
Well, I was slated to get a canning line, and the last 2 years, my brewery is anywhere from 20 to 30 years old, depending on the buying equipment at different intervals, and so that time was spent on just refurbishing those tanks, buying new gaskets, buying new hoses, just completely redoing the bottling line. So unfortunately, there wasn't any money left for the canning line.
Do you think that Stouts would have sold well in cans?
Well, we do some cans.
Right.
A mobile canning line.
Mobile canning, yeah.
Yeah, but
okay.
I think it would have, because it's the wave of the future right now, and you don't have to invest in the 6-pack, the mother carton, like you do for a 12-ounce bottle. You just invest in that label, slap it on, do a batch of beer, do a new batch of beer, do a new label. So it's very easy to get new products into the market quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because the cans are sort of like a sort of the craft, or a sign of the craft brewing industry sort of coming around full circle, because when you opened, you know, as you said, you were only selling draft beer, but then you originally were only putting your beer in large bottles.
750 milliliter.
Right. So there was something very gourmet about the beer back then.
I wanted to be different. Right. I didn't want the beer to look like, quote, a traditional mass marketed beer label.
Right. Well, you did that. And I think that, you know, personally speaking, I would have loved to have seen those bottles come back, but I think that maybe, again...
Well, I'll tell you a story. So we did the large bottles by hand in the beginning. My husband bought me a 1901 bottle filler with 9 heads, and it controlled juice. Some were full, some were half full, it was whatever, high air levels. So then we bought an Italian 20-head large bottle filler, champagne filler. And the beer, the stability was phenomenal. Well, then we bought the 12-ounce bottling line, so we kind of stored the other large bottle, because large bottles then were kind of going down. People didn't want them anymore. Then my husband and one of my brewers sold it without me telling me. So he will never live that down.
Really? Really?
Because it would be nice to have both.
Exactly.
And they'll come back again, you know that.
Well, they will, and you know, we're going to talk in our next episode about the future for stouts, but you know, maybe that would have been a niche for you to continue with.
Hello, yes.
Okay.